Top 5 famous paintings that inspired horror movie makers. Interior and exterior sets and settings, themes and motifs, monsters and menaces, even dialogue and sound effects, all these horror movie elements have been suggested by famous paintings. Inspired by the works of acclaimed artists, horror movie directors have added audio, visual, and dramatic effects to their own creative visions, enhancing their artistic works with those of masters of expressionism, magic realism, surrealism, modernism, romanticism, and the Baroque. The results are striking, adding richness and depth to the film's own images and themes of the horrific and the terrible. Number 5. Amedeo Modigliani paintings. The monster in Stephen King's It is a shapeshifter, able to assume the form of anyone's worst nightmare. Often, it appears as Pennywise, the mad, menacing clown, but, in director Andy Muschietti's 2017 movie adaptation of King's novel, it also transforms itself into such guises as a werewolf, a leper, and a female flutist who emerges from an Amedeo Modigliani painting in the office of the father of young Stanley Uris. The flutist is terrifying because her face is incredibly elongated, the features are beyond asymmetrical, because impossibly out of alignment, and the misshapen skulls seem to waver upon elongated necks. This particular avatar of it, the director explained, is a literal translation of a very personal childhood fear. In my house, there was a print of a Modigliani painting that I found terrifying. And the thought of meeting an incarnation of the woman in it would drive me crazy. The painting's depiction of a female figure was so deformed, the director added, that it struck him as monstrous. In a sense, the bizarre flutist in his version of it is how King's monster appears to him. It has taken the form. Most terrifying to the director, a realization of Muschietti's own worst childhood fear. Number 4. The Nightmare. In 1781, Henry Fuseli painted Der Nachtmar, in which an incubus, or male sex demon, perches upon the abdomen of a sleeping woman dressed in a nightgown, her arms and head dangling off the bed, and the rest of her body in a sensuous attitude. A horse's head emerges from the bedroom's dense shadows. In 2015, the famous painting inspired the motif for the film of the same title, directed by Akais, a pseudonym for Occam Bornhack. The movie's main character, Tina, sleeps with the hideous demonic creature next to her. Is she imagining its presence? Is she the only one who sees it? Real or imaginary, how does the entity relate to Tina, and what does it represent? It seems that Bornhack is purposefully ambiguous about the creature's significance and, therefore, the theme of his movie. The fetus-like being could represent Tina's incipient madness. It could symbolize her estrangement from her peers. It might suggest Tina's fear of rejection. The movie's allusions to Stanley Kubrick's 2001, A Space Odyssey, and to his A Clockwork Orange, to the mystical English romantic poet William Blake, and, of course, to Fuseli's painting seem to frustrate interpretation as much as they might offer clues to the movie's meaning, which makes critics wonder, even more, what Bornhack's intentions could be. Perhaps, the film's meaning depends on the audience's own interpretations. Number 3. House by the Railroad. Known to millions, Norman Bates's Victorian house, standing alone, on the hill overlooking his isolated motel, is one of the most unforgettable parts of the setting for Alfred Hitchcock's macabre 1960 masterpiece Psycho. Far fewer are apt to know that the inspiration for this house of horrors is the 1925 painting House by the Railroad, by the celebrated Edward Hopper. The Museum of Metropolitan Art in New York City describes the painting's residence as a grand Victorian home, its base and grounds obscured by the tracks of a railroad create a visual barrier that seems to block access to the house, which is isolated in an empty landscape. It is just this mood that Hitchcock's house atop the hill creates. Rather than inviting, the house is forbidding. It exists not as part of a larger community, but is, instead, isolated and alone. It cuts off its resident from the larger world, allowing Bates to live in an imaginary reality of his own devise, a world which proves to be one both of loneliness and of madness. Number 2. Susanna and the Elders. Other paintings besides that of Hopper also inspire one of the settings for Psycho, the parlor behind Bates's office in the motel. According to a trailer for the movie, Bates himself describes the parlor as his favorite spot. Pointing out one of the paintings on the parlor's wall, he starts to explain its great significance, but fails to finish his thought. The painting is a print of William Van Mieris's 1731 Susanna and the Elders, which has more than a merely decorative or an aesthetic purpose. It covers the peephole through which Bates spies on Marion Crane. The painting itself recalls the 13th chapter of Daniel in the Catholic Bible, in which Susanna, an upstanding young woman, is spied upon by elders as she bathes. When she refuses their demands to have sex with them, they then endanger both her reputation and her life by lying about their having caught her in the act of adultery. The presence of the painting therefore creates an illusion that underscores the parallels between Susanna's plight and Crane's own, intensifying the movie's suspense. It also implicates the film's audience, who, like the painting's elders and Bates himself, also spy on Crane as she showers. Number 1. Venus with a Mirror. The parlor behind the office of the Bates Motel also displays Titian's 1555 masterpiece Venus with a Mirror. Voluptuous, the half-naked goddess sits, her right arm and lower body draped in red velvet, gazing into a mirror held up for this purpose by a winged Cupid. A similar second attendant holds a hand mirror behind her head, so she can examine herself behind as well as to the front. Her rapt gaze suggests that she is pleased with what she sees. As Katrina Powers observes, in her discussion of the painting in the Journal of American Culture, she holds her left hand up to her chest, perhaps to admire the gold bracelet and ring that adorn it, as she also considers whether the jewelry is a good match for her pearl earrings and the gold and pearl decorations she wears in her blonde hair. In no way should her raised arm be interpreted as shielding her nudity, Powers declares, for it is rather, more likely, one of the many poses she strikes while contemplating her own loveliness. In the display of the Venus portrait alongside that of the Susanna painting, critics have seen multiple meanings, including the connection between voyeurism, desire, and violence, voyeurism, wrongful accusation, corrupted innocence, power misused, secrets, lust and death, and a rape fantasy. It may be, too, that, for Bates, Marion represents the temptation of female sexuality that his mother forbids him, and the desire to surrender to this temptation, through voyeurism that ends in violence and death for Marion, the embodiment of these conflicting impulses and needs.